I think one of the greatest things he taught me was not to take ourselves too seriously. It's good to take our jobs uh, seriously and professionally, but boy, you know, he taught us to have a sense of humor about what we're doing.
Yeah, I think that's what was so appealing about the Star Hustler bits, was that even if you didn't care about astronomy, they were entertaining to watch.
A little bit like Don Hall.
Yeah.
Captain Science.
Yeah, it was Jack Horkheimer gave us our start in planetarium laser shows. So we moved all of our equipment and people down there and really got to know him. He insisted on directing the first laser show. And so he'd always bring out his big gallon of wine, or we provided. And it was great. It was fantastic.
All right, I think we're going to use bottles of wine as the segue to start here. How many bottles of wine have been consumed between March and today? So welcome everybody to eConference number 13. This is our reopening roundtable. The entire session, we're going to be focusing on how our different facilities are planning on reopening and what that looks like, not just sort of the numbers and the quantitative side of it, but maybe even more importantly, how we are approaching our audiences, how we're approaching our industry moving forward. And then of course, you know, in the last couple of days, we've had some major announcements from facilities around the country that we're now on to sort of wave 2 or even wave 3 layoffs and furloughs and things, and how that may still be a possibility for a lot of sites moving forward. So we wanted this to be a very wide-ranging discussion. There are a couple of resources I want to point everybody to as we begin. The first, and this is going to all be in the Zoom chat, and we'll include this in every location that we can otherwise, is the direct link to our discussion notes for today. Patty Seaton has taken on we will just thank you forever. Patty's going to be scribing most of what we're talking about today. And so as we get information, as we compile that, not only are we going to have the live stream, not only are we going to have the discussion notes, but we also have resources that are currently in the Dome Dialogues Google Drive. And so very quickly before we get to the discussion, I'm going to share a quick screen. So to give you just a quick way of looking through the Google Drive, it is a shortened address. It is a bit.ly, so it's bit.ly/Dome Resources. And that's all going to be lowercase. And that's going to take you directly to the Google Drive for Dome Dialogues. You'll see that we have folders for e-conferences. In the future, if you'd like to place files for employment, whether it's, you know, here's a sample resume or CV for somebody who's new to the field, or we want to have employment PDFs or sort of packets for employment that you'd want to add, we can put that there. For our streaming and multimedia content for the e-conferences, we're including those, but it's the reopening roundtable folder that you'll see here that's going to have the most information. We have the reopening realities, the original Facebook thread, which we'll talk about in a second. There's an Event Safety Alliance reopening guide that Dana Thompson from Ball State very kindly shared with us earlier this week. It's a very, very good read, a lot of great information there. We have our notes from today, of course, that are going to be live updated. And then from Adam Fans over at Bays Mountain in Tennessee, he went ahead and surveyed sort of domes and theaters in the local area. So Tennessee, the Carolinas, and North Georgia, and put their responses to sort of what they're doing as they look forward into reopening. We're going to have Adam summarize a little bit of that. All of this is freely available. We're going to be posting this in as many different places as possible so that you can use it, you can look at it, you can bring it to the powers that be if they want information on sort of what else is going on in the industry. But those are resources that we have in there now that we want you to be able to take advantage of. The other reason we're doing this, of course, was the kind of the catalyst for this was a post that Steve Fentress posted probably about 3 or 4 weeks ago about ideas of how we would be reopening. And there was a lot of comments. We had a really good response to that, and really gave the idea that this would be an opportunity to get as many members of the community together and just talk openly about it. And that's what we're going to try to do today. We don't really have an agenda. We can sort of go through with both the chat and with the participant hands. Anybody that wants to share, feel free to do that. Ask questions, bring up ideas, and hopefully we can kind of work through some best practices. We can see what most sites are doing, and we can, maybe steal some really good ideas if we haven't thought of them already. And so thanks, John, for putting that in there. bit.ly/Dome Resources, and that's where the Google Drive will remain. So as we move forward, there's 15 gigabytes of space in there. Anyone with that link has the ability to add. So it's not like you're just going to go there and see what's there. If you have resources that you'd like to share with the community, please feel free to use that as an asset for you and for everyone else. So as we're letting more people into the room, I think we'll sort of open this out. Adam, if you don't mind, I think given how much you've already been able to pull information-wise, I'm going to turn it over to Adam Thans for the beginning here, just to kind of summarize what he's found in his survey, and then turn that over to everybody else.
Okay. Well, thank you, Michael. I didn't expect a forum like this, but that's great. Essentially, we're in Tennessee, which is one of the first states that was trying to reopen. But at Bays Mountain Park, where I work, and I am a city employee, by the way. We're not private. I'm a city employee, and we are trying to be very cautious. And so it looks like we may be opening the building, the Nature Center, in June, but not the planetarium still. And it's mainly crowd control, but it's also the planetarium part is an enclosed space. And we're very concerned about putting people in a room for a period of time. And so I was asked by our park manager to solicit information from some of the nearby planetariums to us. And I got responses from everybody that I asked for. And I hope it's okay that we're sharing this openly. I know I saw Richard McColeman in there, and he was one of the responders. But I had a whole bunch of questions. Some of them were very basic. Part of the purpose was to help all of us kind of understand the dynamics of the bigger picture. It's more than just 50% occupancy, and then that's how it is. People away from each other, but in all aspects. Entering the theater, how do they get tickets? How do they enter the theater? How are they placed in the theater? How do they exit the theater? And then while in the theater, how is that handled? So there's no way we would ever do 50% occupancy at this time. But I had looked at some drawings of our theater that were made from actually a laser scanner, a LiDAR scanner. And so I had very accurate drawings, and it became very clear. It's like, well, what if somebody wants to leave during the show? You don't want those people crossing the laps of others that would normally happen. And so it's like, okay. And so it turns out, if you haven't been to our planetarium, we have one back row that's solid, But then the entrance aisleway is in the center around the star projector and digital projectors. And then there are these kind of half rows that go to the east and west on either side. And it turns out that every other row is about 6 feet apart, which makes it easy on that part. And so what we're looking at is, let's make it simple. If a single person comes in, or a couple comes in, or a family comes in, we look at two different numbers. One is total numbers of people entering the theater, which I think we're trying to shoot for about 15, and we have 102 seats. Though we are a 40-foot dome and we really should have 85 seats. So still, we're looking at about 15 or so whenever we do open. Then we have 7 total rows available. And that way we don't have to worry about, well, did someone sit in this row or not? It's not open seating. It's just, there's this row, then the next row is blocked, then the next row is open on either side, then the next row is blocked, to make it simple. And then also to block off seats that are close to the aisleway, so that when somebody does exit, they're not walking right past somebody as well. And it also allows the console operator to be, to have proximity if they need to, or to get around the star projector. So the purpose of the survey was try to address all those things, and also just quantity of time in an enclosed space. There was an article that was released recently that showed that even with social distancing, if people are like, there was a case about a church who they separated from each other, but they were a choir and they were singing. I think it was a practice or something. And then, but they were in there for 2.5 hours, and almost everybody got sick that was in the church, even though they were 6 feet apart. And so, there's that part to consider. Questions, basically, it's like, when do you plan on opening? Are you going to regulate movement within your public spaces? These are the types of questions that were asked, and it's in the Google Drive that you can download. Do you have plans on dealing with a belligerent visitor? How often will you clean? How large is the lobby space, which is the waiting area? How will you deal with ticket sales? It's all these things, is to try to understand the bigger picture of how to deal with this flow of people and handling them and keeping them in a safe environment, as well as the console operator too. They're going to be in there. Essentially, it's hard. I can't just summarize very simply, but I think everybody was looking at reducing the quantity of shows anyway, partly just to reduce the amount of people in there, but also you need time to clean. Most everybody was saying they would clean after every show. Now, depending on the size of the theater, will determine how much time you need. For our theater, we figure we would need almost up to an hour to do a good cleaning. And that's with restricting the seats that are available. And we're a 40-foot dome with 102 seats, but again, with every other row. And that means anything that they would touch, the doors, the door handles, any railings, the seats themselves, the armrests, the seats, the cushions, all of that. And that takes time. And then you also don't want your operator to be stuck in that room all day, breathing that air. They need time to get out and for the air to circulate. So again, most people were looking at trying to separate shows to have cleaning time or break time, definitely reducing the number of people in the theater. And, a big part of coordinating movement is dependent upon your layout of your theater. How big is the doorway to enter? As an example, in our theater, we have a wraparound inner hallway for a light lock and the light levels drop, your typical entranceway. Well, it's pretty long. And so, thinking about, okay, do we want people walk, even if they're separated 6 feet, walk through that wake behind others as you enter. And so now what we're looking at is, can we enter from one of the exits, much shorter? They enter through an exit way. We seat them and it's kind of like little kids. Okay, start with the back row and then go from one side to the other, alternating rows. And oh, my video will just want you hear me? Can you hear me?
Adam, you've been going in and out, so I think for this case, if we go without the video, we should still be able to hear you well.
Okay, so we're going to leave by the front rows first, one to let it out to way.
All right, Adam, we're having a bit more issues with the audio. If you want to just kind of hold on to that, we'll kind of move around and get a few more things in, see if we can't get a better connection with you. But at the very least, kind of giving us a good basis to start from. So we'll kind of just going to go with the group chat and see kind of everything. Sean Latch asked, has anyone opened yet? So do we have anyone who has opened at all yet and has anything to share? Okay, that might be a good thing in that case. So for any of you who are looking to open sooner rather than later, anything you're sharing, you'd like to share about how you're prepping for the inevitable at this point?
Yeah, I'll chime in. So our planetarium is connected to a large museum and in Houston. And today actually is our opening day in the museum. And the planetarium is not open, and neither is our giant screen theater. But our main exhibit halls and Butterfly Center are open. And everybody is required to, patrons and staff are all required to wear a mask at all times in the building. We're also opening at 25% capacity, which for our entire building is about 1,000 people or so. And there are staff members positioned at every exit. There's only one entrance now, and everything else is an exit only. And staff members are spread all throughout to tally comings and goings to make sure that we're always at that capacity or under. And 6 foot separation, and lots of signage and lots of stanchions to kind of navigate people around to form a queue so that inside each little area or exhibit. And the theater will open to the public, I think in July is the plan. Again, with limited capacity and cleaning in between each shows. But we are going to open, because we're starting summer camps in June, the planetarium will be run a few shows once a day for the summer camp kids only, not for the general public. But in July, hopefully we'll open up to the general public. So I think we were one of the first facilities in our city on this scale to open up for the museum anyway. So that's some of our experiences.
Thanks, Adam. What we're going to do, we're going to go Paulette and then Marco, and then we have a few in-chat questions that we'll get to then. So Paulette, go ahead.
Yeah, so we actually had a quick meeting today where we were talking about reopening and all of that. And along with sort of the encouraging people to wear masks, distance him in the theaters and in the spaces. So at the Michigan Science Center, of course, we're a hands-on museum. So our theaters are probably going to be the only thing we can open, since all of our exhibit spaces are hands-on. And we're looking to extend our hours so that people are able to come throughout the course of the day a little bit longer, as well as we've actually, our HVAC person right now is in there changing out our filters for the HVAC system. So we usually use MERV 12. And we have stepped it up to MERV 13, which are the hospital grade filters. And it actually has like a viral side on the filter so that it will kill any viruses that come into contact with it. So really, really trying to get the air cleaner that people are breathing in, as well as, instead of recycling the air from inside the building, pulling fresh air from outside. So that's a big change that we're doing as well. And we'll probably be looking at about a 25% capacity as well, opening hopefully July 1st, if all goes as planned.
Thanks, Paulette. Marco, we'll go to you.
Okay, thank you and hi everyone. We've been making some heavy thoughts about our mobile dome. Do I have some mobile colleagues here? Yeah, okay. So I'm going to share some photographs of our dome so I can show you some things. Here are the two domes that we currently have. The one at the right was our old classic Starlab, and the one at the left is the digital one. So with both, we have one initial problem that is getting the people inside because they have to touch something. For the classic one at the right, there's a tunnel and they have to open it with their own hands to get into. And the same happens with the door in the black one. They touch a lot of the entrance. In fact, we here in Costa Rica, when we get to go to public schools, especially after recess, pardon me, all the kids are sweating all over. It's terrible. And we have to make some cleanup, usually, not only of the entrance, but of the inside too. Sorry. So we have that problem with the entrance, but also inside, we don't have discrete seats for each people. So we just get the kids on some cushions, comfortable, but they are very close to each other. They're coming here outside, here is in the tunnel. So yeah, the problem is the social distancing inside the mobile dome seems to have no sense. I'll tell you why. Let me share a different screen to you. Okay, I don't find the whiteboard here, so I'm going to use just the Photoshop. Okay, so let me try to draw here. Can I? It doesn't let me. Well, I don't know why Photoshop isn't allowing me to draw here.
Marco, you may need to double click on the background layer and convert that into a standard layer.
Is that?
Oh, there we go. You have something there.
Okay, so it happened. Okay, so this kind of sketch here, dome. So if you got one people here, the other one, maybe 7, which I was calculating that could be around about 2 meters apart from each other, it still makes no sense because if you're wearing a face mask, you still have your eyes exposed and the air is going to be tornading around you. So it doesn't matter if you are 1, 2, 3, 5 meters apart, it's going to be the same atmosphere for everyone. So apart from the entrance, you still have the airflow problem here inside. So how can we make a mobile dome a little bit safer than this? I think we won't be able to use inflatable domes as long as this thing about infection still happens. If we have another dome which is solid, that we may ensemble at the place. We can change the thing about the air. Instead of blowing it inside the dome, we should extract the air. So we get a more laminar airflow maybe from one side to the other. This could be applied even to big domes, I think. But if you extract rather than blow the air into, you can make a difference in the airflow inside the dome. So maybe some different kind of mobile dome, which is rigid or solid, can be built or engineered this way. Why solid? Because you have an entrance that nobody has to touch to. So you can avoid that other issue. So these are some of the things we may be considering in the middle or long term of changing our domes, or just to wait for the vaccine, you see, because the inflatable domes were not made for this. There's no safe way to use them. So we may have to change that. What's happening with our planetarium here in Costa Rica? Well, we usually have an annual, a yearly, pardon me, a yearly contract from our government. And this time they had a presentation for August, and they asked us, okay, just go online. We still pay you, but just go online. So we're going to do that. We're going to have about 1,000 kits in August, but we're going to produce maybe some pre-recordings and some live shows for them. But we have to be we have to keep our quality. For the visuals, the experience that they're going to have online has to be maybe not the same of the dome, but it has to be fine. There has to be a good quality presentation. Yeah, that's more or less our situation and what we have thought about the mobile domes. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Marco, for kind of elucidating this in a way that I think all of us are looking at this and going like, this is difficult for regular domes. It's damn near impossible for the portable ones. So the fact that you're actively trying to think about trying to fix this, of course, is great. We're going to go back a little bit into the chat. There's a lot been going on. Of course, we're going to make sure to share the transcript as well. Renee Kerrigan from the Dome Planetarium in Peoria was asking about working on experiences for planetariums and flat screens for small groups, 8 or less. And if anybody's working on private shows, laser shows, date nights, things of that sort. There was questions about what do you do if people don't want to wear masks? That was from Chris McCall. Catherine Hunt from Ingram. Some people can't actually physically wear the masks, the CDC thing. And then, of course, because of HIPAA restrictions, you can't ask people about most of their medical history or as to why they can't wear that. And then there's been some talk, of course, about assigned seating, whether or not that's a tenable thing for most sites. See if we can catch up here. Negative pressure domes, Marco, maybe a little bit more what you're looking for, where the dome surface is sucked up, and then you can have the openings on the sides. But as Charlie Rao, who is representing Seiler and has put this together quite a bit on the on a trade show floor. Charlie, would you mind briefly speaking to sort of the negative pressure dome environment and sort of how that's worked?
Yeah, sure. So it's great for conferences for that sort of a thing, but it's not the kind of thing that you would put up and take down frequently or quickly, right? It is intended to be more, I like to think of it as semi-permanent because you're going to just put it up there, leave it there for some time. Maybe it's a matter of days and then take it down. But something like that could take a while. It just depends on the framework that goes behind it, because a negative pressure dome typically has a structure around it that then, the you're sucking out the air between the outer cover and the inner cover. You're creating a negative pressure compared to the, or a lower pressure really, compared to the surrounding area. So that has the effect of like inflating a balloon, but it's really more like just sucking the air out of the space between the two layers. So it keeps that surface round, but there's a lot of little parts in there that you got to get just right, and it's not super convenient for that type of dome. But you know, that dome that we've brought to the conferences was intended for demonstration purposes, where we're going to leave it up like that, and it's one way of doing it, specifically with what we had in mind. There are other types of domes that can be done in different ways. I know there's some patented technologies that have been out there for multiple types of pressures within the same dome structure. But I definitely feel like having something where you have greater airflow and can set people apart a bit is a way to go. There's also, I know it came up about the HVAC systems and how that might work with the domes. Some of you may know or have noticed in your domes, depending on the design of it, some do in fact draw that air, like the return on some of the tilted domes happens at the seat level. So you're drawing that air down past the seats and you know, taking that from the audience back out elsewhere. So some of that does already exist in some of the designs, but it's definitely something to be cautious of or think about, cognizant of as we move forward. And another thought to that as well, one thing that's absolutely looked over way too frequently. I know there's a lot of dome construction projects out there, and the architects and HVAC folks never really consider that you just don't want to push air or suck air through the holes of the dome, because then you create either a spot where you've caught all of the dirt or a spot where you've blasted the dirt away just enough so that you end up with a black ring around where that vent is. So you always want to do that in a more diffused way elsewhere. And it wasn't a problem in the older domes when you had a gap between the dome itself and then the cove, because there was that kind of a gallery for projectors. So there's a lot of sort of knowledge of those things that are kind of getting lost as we move forward. It's important to think about all those little parts. I know a lot of times we worry about what technology goes in the room and what, you know, how we're going to get audiences in there and stuff like that. But there's so many little fidgety bits, and there's so few planetariums that are made that it's not like there's a wealth of talented, skilled, experienced altogether in all those categories, architects and construction companies who are used to going around building domes. I mean, like whole planetariums. Obviously, there's dome providers that do a great job. But yeah, so I don't know. Does that help, Michael?
That's fantastic. Yeah, and it's, you know, it's the little things that Ken brought up. So we'll very, very briefly put on the business hat. So as the representative of Spitz, we do have a negative pressure dome that we've set up a couple of times. It is the exact same design as what Charlie and the folks at Seiler are using, and we run into the same issues. It's takes a long time to set up. Yes, it's open and tilted, and there's air movement, but you still have people that will be underneath the dome, and that can get stagnant. And then we have sort of the same issues that we run into with an inflatable dome. Sally Brummel, I know you had your hand up for a while. I want to make sure to get to you. So if you still have a question, please.
No, sorry. I was just saying I had a portable dome too, and then I didn't put my hand back down. So it kind of hurts, but thanks for checking on me.
Oh, absolutely. Want to make sure everybody's doing well. But yeah, and so one of the things with just dome design in general, we try to tell all our customers, make sure HVAC is tangential to the dome. You never want air flowing into the perforations. You want them going at an angle so that you're trying to diffuse as much of that out as possible and not have, like Charlie pointed out, sort of these hot air spots, if you will, on one particular part of your dome. Let's see. So now we've introduced portables. We've talked a little bit about sort of the fixed domes. continuing to open it up. Anyone else want to share any questions that we think we might be able to, that you think you'd like to have discussed here as we move forward? So please feel free.
Those of you working with school populations, it is possible to add in a couple of extra layers of protection, because presumably the teacher, upon entry of the class that day, the classroom is going to be screening the kids to make sure nobody's got a fever, for example. So you can exclude that part of the population from your field trip very simply by including it in your permission slip. And the second thing, I plan on doing, HIPAA or not, I'm going to say you wear a mask or you don't come in. Sorry. And that's the best I can do. You know, so and it will be clear on the permission slip, masks are required. If you can't wear a mask, I'm sorry, you can't go. We'll offer you the virtual version of our show. You know, that's the best I can do right now anyway.
A very good point brought up by Richard McColeman, talking about staff exposure. I know we're doing a lot to try to make sure that our audiences stay safe. Let's turn that back on us. What are we thinking about doing to keep us safe?
One thing I know for us, we're looking into options we always wear microphones anytime we're presenting. So we're looking into new microphone options that you can wear with a mask and still be heard effectively.
Paulette?
And so we're looking at the way that our planetarium is sort of set up is there is a back console area, potentially putting up plexi or some sort of temporary system to keep them separated from the rest of the room, but still able to see what's going on in the room. And luckily our Palm Pilot has a plug-in in the back of the room as well as in the front, so we can do the show from back there. Don't give me that face. And at least in our IMAX theater, we're pretty well set because our projectionist lives in a hole in the ground. So he's going to be as safe as anyone can possibly be.
Sean Latch shares face masks, Plex shields, and regular cleaning, plus hand sanitizer at multiple locations. So great ideas there. Anybody else with ideas of how you're going to keep yourself safe and your staff safe moving forward?
One more thing, we've also thought about making announcements every 30 minutes to remind people to wash their hands and to use hand sanitizer building wide, whether it's staff or guests.
Yeah, along those lines, just messaging, post lots of signs, post it on your social media, email lists, anything that really gets the word out so that people are not surprised when these are enforced.
Kat, go ahead.
I did a test with my lapel mic and I can actually use it with a mask on. I sound a little bit deeper, but it worked out. So I'm going to do that. We also have face shields. So I'm going to let my presenters choose their equipment of choice. I'm just going to use a cloth mask for myself. And they're also going to all have their own laser pointers and their own microphone poofs for the lapel mic. And we'll sanitize all of our surfaces between each presenter.
Great. Adam, go ahead.
Yeah, Kat just said it. What we're looking at, since we have 4 people that could possibly be giving presentations, we're going to just have 4 microphones, 4 laser pointers, and we each have our own little bin to keep those in. So that way we don't cross between that. Of course, clean the desk itself, the console desk, and try to get the console operator out of that room after they clean. So once they clean, take a break, go out, get out of there and go outside or something, and just to, minimize that exposure and being in that room.
Great. And then in the chat, Paulette says, because of the number of presenters that would be in the planetarium, can't afford, don't have the ability to use multiple mics or have dedicated mics for everybody, but could do things like separate poofs. So for example, these little guys, if you're not using a windscreen already on your mic, especially if it's a handheld, go on ahead and use these. They're really cheap. You can get 5 for $10 on Amazon. And that's probably a cheap and effective way of minimizing the amount of, let's be honest, we know how much spit and stuff gets on these mics. So anything we can do to make that clean is going to be great. Amy Gallagher had a great idea, a great question about where we do our programming. In this case, indoor versus outdoor programming. So for those of you who do a lot of outreach, or for those of you who are thinking maybe going truly outside the dome, any thoughts on that?
So at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, we're having a discussion of turning our building into a drive-in movie theater, and using wall spaces, ideally on the north side of our building where our parking lot is, to be able to project planetarium content in a flat screen format, our IMAX shows, and potentially Hollywood movies as well. We do Hollywood favorites in our IMAX every weekend. So could we utilize those contracts? So we're investigating equipment now. I have a feeling it might be a little cost prohibitive, but we're kind of hoping there are some desperate vendors out there that have events canceled that will say, sure, make us an offer. We'll see how long we can work with us on finances. So that is our push. We also have a smaller wall on the south side of our building closer to a park side that we're looking at doing some outdoor projection of content on. The problem is we'd have to work with our city to get a park permit to make that happen.
I've been toying with the idea of doing some stargazing events once we're able to do that by kind of the state guidelines. And what I was thinking that would look like is just providing a telescope to an individual or a family group. I have a bunch of telescopes, and I'm limited by kind of how easy they are to use. So pretty much I'd only want to hand out some Dobsonians. So like one family could get one Dob, another family get another. That would limit me to maybe like 3 groups of people, but it still could be fun and a very enjoyable thing. Teach them how to use the telescope because they'll have to use it themselves. So that's one thing I'm looking at doing.
Brian, actually, to piggyback on that, one of the things that we did down in Orlando for a couple of years was, as part of sort of 2 or 3 of our major events every year, we would do live star shows outside. And it wasn't, a bunch of people in a 40 or 50 foot circle. We're looking at a parking lot that's roughly the size of a football field. And, you'd have people sort of set out. Even then, they'd be 20, 30 feet apart from each other on picnic blankets. But if you were in the center, for us, it was usually 3 or 4 big powered speakers and a couple of microphones, that if you were kind of sequestered in the center and you had the speakers that could go out, especially in a quieter location or a place where you've got a lot of flat land between you and the people, not a lot of trees and things, we found we could do star parties with 300 people in a really big area. And it falls to the presenter to be extremely descriptive about how people are to look and find things in the sky. You're not going to go anything that's super faint, but we found out that as long as you had Orion or the Big Dipper and we could point people in the right direction verbally, then they could follow along. We could do a star show for 25 or 30 minutes and they'd get sort of a planetarium experience outside. You're just kind of set off in the circle in the middle where you don't have to be walking around. You don't have to worry about, getting too far away from like a wireless receiver. You don't have to worry about feedback or hearing yourself a second later as the sound reaches you, but you still can bring people to the facility, still give them a unique experience, but they can still all leave and all get in without really having to interact with people. That we found that worked pretty well, and it's something now where maybe then we would have done it for a few hundred people. Now it might work for 80 or 100 in a area of that size, but certainly an idea if you wanted to do an outdoor event. Loudspeakers work really, really well, and people are willing to sit there and like they can see you, but they can see the stars. And you know, you've got something there that you can add to the list of events.
And circling back to like presentations with digital planetarium stuff, I guess a positive of the fact that a lot of us are doing online presentations right now is we're getting used to what planetarium things look like on a rectangular screen. So like when we get back, we'll probably be doing a lot of our presentations not in the dome at all, but out on the floor on flat screens throughout the building and stuff like that. So getting some practice in right now, I suppose.
Patty brings up the very important point. You can use a green laser, just be mindful of airplanes. One great idea I heard a couple of years ago was the particularly bright LED green flashlights, especially ones that are focusable, can produce almost a lightsaber width of light that for light polluted skies, or especially if you're here on the East Coast, where the humidity tends to be a little bit higher, shows up really, really well as opposed to a laser pointer, and has a much wider range to every side where people can see it. I think we used one where if I had the laser pointer on a moonless night, you could be about 50 feet away from me in any direction and still see where I was pointing. And those are much, much less dangerous to a pilot than a dedicated green laser pointer. Mike Murray brings up a great idea. Have people bring maybe their own telescopes or a pair of binoculars so that they can follow along without having to have the need to have them congregate around a common star party area or a common telescope. Colin Hutchison's got a question. How do we plan to ticket? Physical tickets, mobile, online? Anybody given thought? Of course you've given thought. Anybody want to share what their plans are for ticketing moving forward?
Yeah, we're moving to a like 99% online tickets. You have to purchase them in advance before you come to the Science Center. And also then making it so that people are directed to a page when they are in the Science Center on our Wi-Fi, so that they can purchase additional tickets, say if they did not initially purchase the package with the planetarium, they want to go to the planetarium. Being on our Wi-Fi will direct them to a certain page that they can then also see all of the ticket options available. But we have scanners at each of our theaters that can just scan the mobile ticket, and we will not be taking anything from anybody else's hands as much as we can help it.
All right, Carol Holmberg said there'll be Eventbriting and for members only at first. That seems a good place to start. Anybody else with ticketing?
Something we had done before we closed, and this is literally the day before we closed, but we were collecting tickets for a laser show, and we just had people show us their tickets and then drop them in a basket so that we didn't have to touch them. So trying to find a no contact way to collect the ticket if a printed ticket is the only way. The basket worked out pretty well. And we used clickers because we only needed the tickets to count our numbers. And we looked at them to confirm that it was for the right show. So we used our just attendance clickers to click the tickets as they were dropped in the basket.
Kat, go ahead. I see your hand. You are currently, yeah, there you go.
Sorry. I'm going to screen share what I kind of created and talk a little bit about it. We don't have the infrastructure to do online or screen tickets. I'd like that, but it's not somewhere where we're at right now. We've traditionally had tickets that we passed out at the desk, and then they would get returned to the presenter when they entered the dome. We're going to do away with that. But to keep track of our numbers, I created this sheet. It literally just has a spot for each and every seat that's in the dome. And when the person at the visitor services desk sells a ticket, they're going to check off the seats. And the people that are in the building are all going to have purchased seats. And then I've also got it color coded so that we know when we're hitting our capacities. And then at the end, when everyone's in the dome, that same person will input the total into our attendance tracking form like normal. I'll laminate them so that they can be dry erase, and it will just reuse them over and over and then remake them as they wear out. That's the solution that we've developed.
Well, thanks, Kat. Steve Fentress brings up a very important point about cash. First, how many of you are still sort of cash and check only, sort of the olden days? Patty, I see a couple of hands. For those of you who are going to utilize cash, or are you in facilities in which you will not accept cash at all at this point? And that was open floor, like everybody can respond to that.
That will be the 1% of the ticket sales that we cannot do online. And we don't like to deal in cash, but we also know that some people don't have access. And it is definitely an access thing. The other thing that we're doing is actually this summer, when we do come back, we're offering free admission to the Science Center, funded by somebody, or by I think it's Aramco, I'm not sure. But that will also help with that, because those who don't have access to a credit card or a debit card are more likely to come in for free anyhow.
Great. We're seeing, and Steve had also mentioned, Steve Fentress had mentioned from the cash side, is that it's sort of, if maybe you do exact change and then that money is just put into a slot, someplace where there's no transmission between the person paying and the person receiving. Kat says we're going to encourage people to call in the day of their visit to pay over the phone, but we'll have to take cash if you're open. Michelle brings up the point. What's the difference of holding cash or a credit card? Still probably gross, both of them. Yeah, this is certainly the interesting part here of, once we get past this, and this is, this may be dealing with just with public audiences, but I know for especially in sort of the school cases, there are far more school shows moving forward, where we're going to have school groups come in. Specifically in talking about that, what are your plans at your facilities moving forward in dealing with school groups and matching up maybe sort of the work you've done in previous years, perhaps if you have a contract with the school district or something like that, and then beyond that, working with students who may be more disadvantaged, or they're coming from areas in which they may not have access to masks or PPE or sanitizer in the way that maybe the more affluent areas do. Just opening that up to everybody. How do you foresee working in sort of those situations and environments?
Well, my plan is to provide masks for everybody. Just have them on site, and the kid wears it once, throws it away on the way out the door in the trash can, which will be by the exit. So we'll have disposable masks, and my plan is to have one for everybody there. So yeah.
Ken, what's the plan for the financial side of that in terms of who's providing that?
Well, fortunately, I have discretionary money in my budget to buy things like masks and gowns, things that we need to have to run the place. And they're not going to be that expensive, I don't think. I mean, it's not a major league offense, or expense rather. The other thing is they're going to try and limit it to one class per visit. At least, given what Marco said earlier, I'm really concerned now. I'm going to have to go in and do some tape measuring inside my 6-meter dome, which is slightly larger. So that still gives me, if my calculations are ballparking, 13 seats. So I've got to go in there with the tape measure and figure out what the metrics are.
Chris McCall made a good point about, a lot of schools are probably not going to be wanting to send their students to physical field trips. So we may expand this a little bit more and say, in addition to all of the things we're trying to do for the facilities, sort of on the longer term of how planetariums are evolving, how many of you are working on virtual field trips or trying to figure out, or more importantly, maybe trying to figure out what the pay structure for a virtual field trip looks like? So if any of you could share that, I think that'd be extremely useful.
Go ahead, Renee.
We have I was going to say, to your point, Michael, of underserved schools, like how do you serve them still? My museum has this program called the Every Student Initiative, which is a donor funded. I'm talking on a conference, sweetie. I do like the mail carrier. That was my daughter. We have a donor-funded program called the Every Student Initiative that takes all of the public school children in kindergarten through 8th grade to my museum every year, and that's about 8,000 students. And the donors have already given us the money for it. It's already committed. So our challenge has been, how do we still fulfill our commitment to the students and to the donors who are funding the program while keeping the students safe and also while they're at home? So we did these like takeout sacks for our first, these field trip take in a sack sort of idea, just for our first solution. But we're working on virtual field trips for next school year, because we don't think we're going to, the number of groups that would be coming is usually 150 at a time or 200 at a time. And we can't do that. We won't be able to do that until there's a vaccine. And then we're also working on potentially figuring out how to go to the schools. But of course, I was grateful for the ideas about mobile domes. I sent a note just to make sure no one in my facility was really thinking about taking our mobile dome to a school, because that just won't work with all the good points that were brought up today. So anyway, that's some of the things that we're working on. We're also working on virtual options.
We're going to go Colin Hutchison and then Paulette.
In Birmingham Think Tank, we had this discussion just the other day. We've had feedback from the local schools saying most probably wouldn't be wanted to bring anyone until at least January, if not 21-22 academic year. So we're thinking of possibly doing something like a virtual workshop where we either tell the school or the class, have these objects, and we'll have the same objects at Think Tank and kind of use them as, kind of talk them through how to use them so that we can replicate the experiments. As for planetarium, we're still working on that, but it'll be a museum first, and then it will become planetarium as when and if. But we've got about 9 different sites. We're looking at all the different sites and the flow of people through the museum.
Paulette, go ahead.
So the Michigan Science Center, located in Detroit, we're in Michigan, and so there's a lot of people that that can't come to our science center. So we've actually already had a pretty hefty virtual program, distance learning program, before all of this even started. So we have 3 different types of programs that we do. One of them is where we put together a kit, we send the kit of materials to the classroom, and then we do the experiment with them along with some other things. They're usually about an hour long. And then we have sort of webinar type ones. So like the programs that we're doing on our Echo Live that are live and interactive. I actually did a planetarium one a couple of weeks ago with a group in Northern Canada. So these kids are all up by the Arctic Circle. They do mostly distance learning anyhow for schooling. So nothing has really changed for them. But we charge for some of the programs. One program is usually about $150. So they're still relatively inexpensive, even when we do send them the kit of materials. Now, the third way that we are planning to do virtual field trips is using something called Nearpod. And I'll put a link in the chat. The Nearpod is sort of like a way to add in like fun rap videos and that have scientific themes, or it's called Flocabulary. So we add those in, as well as the like curriculum content videos that we've created, as well as lessons and things that kids can do. And so we're planning to launch those on June 1st. When we do launch the Nearpod stuff and our virtual field trips, I will send a link out on Dome Dialogues, so you guys can take a look at those. They've been definitely a lot of fun to sort of put together. And that's how we're getting around some of the issues that we have with like funding. We get funded to bring in every 9th grader, every 1st grader, every 4th grader from Detroit Public School Community District. And those grade levels, each of them include about 4,000 kids. And so we're trying to figure out how we continue to do those field trips for them, using the things like Nearpod and the things that we have. So like I said, once that comes together, I will send out a thing on Dome Dialogue so you guys can take a look. And I'll put a link to Nearpod and that in the chat.
Thanks. Toshi, go ahead.
First of all, thank you, Michael, for setting up this open forum. It's been enormously helpful, and it's been great to hear from everybody on their thoughts. But regarding virtual field trips, we've started to talk about that here for my dome. Like Renee, we have concerns about that. You know, we have 139 seats. We don't always fill them up for field trips, but we're thinking we can't, really have anywhere near that capacity until there's a vaccine, which could be quite a long time. So we are looking at virtual field trips. A question that I have, and I was going to post this on Dome Dialogues as a question, but is so because I'm at a community college, we're able to get like the pro level account of Zoom, which has capacity for up to 300 participants. So I'm wondering, for those that have already been doing virtual field trips or those that are thinking about it, what are your sort of concerns about sort of managing, large groups virtually, right? Like 100 kids in the planetarium, like I can deal with that. 100 kids on Zoom, I'm wondering about pitfalls, and then, sort of even more so, right? Because my boss, who's, rightly, like, he's worried about revenue. I mean, I am too, but that's more his job. But he's like, well, why don't we do a field trip for 300? And it's like, do I want to do a virtual field trip for 300 participants? I just don't know. So that was sort of just kind of an open question there about dealing with virtual field trips, how to deal with the classroom management, how many people, do you limit it to one school? Do you open it to like, multiple schools can join, especially if you have a larger limit, like, can I get 3 schools in there? And how do you deal with that? So side question for people to think about.
We've been getting a few responses in the chat about essentially using Zoom as the webinar rather than as a meeting the way that we do, so that you'd have maybe 1 or 2 sign-ins, the teachers themselves is the point, and then they would be able to project everything else to their classrooms without having all of those children be under your control or having to see them and running around. So yeah, that would be. And Sarah from Bell Museum, webinars address a lot of the safety issues because there are only 1, 2, maybe at most 3 or 4 points of contact, and those points of contacts are the teachers, and so they would be the responsible parties and not necessarily you controlling who's in the room, because you'd only have those 3 or 4. Patricia, of course, says, raising the hand and then calling on them individually. Sort of what we've done here in a lot of the e-conferences, except that, you know, we're all functionally adults, and it's worked out pretty well. So the hand popped up. Ken Brandt, go ahead.
I was going to say, kind of to tangent over back to the virtual shows in general, I hate to play devil's advocate, but what if we're too good at it? At some point, what if somebody says, what's the point of a physical dome to begin with if we're so good at making the virtual ones happen? So I've been, in my programs, I've been saying, well, if we were in the real planetarium, you'd see these stars up over your head, you know, to make that illusion back to the real physical place, because I'm very afraid that we might get so good at this that we lose it.
Well, I think that gets into a philosophical discussion for any conference in the future. But yeah, that is a totally different experience. It's you know, virtual is not immersive. Netflix exists, and yet Avengers still made $2 billion at the box office. So you know, maybe more apples and pears than apples and apples. But yeah, if anything, this seems to be you know, and then there's probably some content providers that wouldn't be too happy with this. This is clearly like now the heyday of live and interactive planetarium presentations. We're moving away from, it seems like we're moving away from push button. So I guess those types that said that planetariums were dead, you know, they protest too much. I think if anything, it looks like we seem to be moving more into like a renaissance of sort of planetarium experiences. We're just having to do them in a different way, and that's part of the adapting to these changing times. Alicia says, if immersive planetarium shows are a type of theater, theater has survived every major plague and pandemic of history. Very, very true. And of course, we've gotten much great art out of pandemics and plagues in the past. So let's just say that we're all going to make really good stuff moving forward, and it's just continuing to blossom. Anyone else want to speak to virtual field trips or pricing, anything like that? We've kind of got a little bit more, we're a little more open now on the topic, so please feel free to jump in if there's anything in particular. Kara, go ahead.
So just to comment on that last point, you know, surely it's a concern that we've been arguing at our community college for a long time, is how to stay relevant as a dome in the age of YouTube. And we've actually used hands-on interactive activities at the planetarium to make that happen for a while, in combination with dome events, and kind of creating this more immersive experience where we do something in the dome and then we do our hands-on interactive stuff, and the schools come for more than just a 50-minute session. And so just to speak to that, developing all these activities and doing them virtually does not mean that at some later time, the schools might not be able to come back, watch a dome movie, and then do that interactive. Because a lot of our schools are really focused on, yeah, watching a movie is nice, but we want you to actually do something with the kids. And so we started implementing those activities about 1.5 years ago, that we could actually do stuff with them in smaller groups and then send the other group into the dome and switch.
Mm-hmm.
So we found that was actually a very good business model for our schools, and the school, like sometimes the kids eat lunch in between, and then they're on like a half-day field trip instead of coming out for an hour.
Patricia brought up courses for teachers, and that I think is an excellent avenue for some discussion. I think planetariums are excellent gateways for professional development for those of them who are not planetarians. So is it something where you're thinking, moving ahead, do we have an opportunity in sort of the post first wave pre-vaccine era, where we can be doing a lot of professional development for teachers and educators that helps to bridge the gap between now and then? Resounding agreement on that one. Paula, did you want
I
to
can say something. This is Julieta, sorry.
go ahead?
So this bridging is precisely what we're trying to do with the Lunar Caravan, and
I hope that my experience in working with virtual reality and understanding how you have to put the senses together and connect with direct experience will be something that we can do. So hopefully that will be at least some opportunity, not only for having activities like given to people, but anybody that wants to support this effort can contribute and would get acknowledged in doing so. So hopefully that's something.
Great. Ken or Paulette, I know both of you put something in the chat about doing professional development for teachers. If either of you or both of you like to speak to that for a second, that'd be great.
Well, you know, we have standards that we align to. So I've been pulling together like 6th grade teachers and talking about exploration of the solar system and, you know, the learning from space exploration, which is pretty unique to North Carolina, I think, and Texas. So grade appropriate PD for a particular set of grade level teachers, like 3rd, 4th, and 6th are what I'm concentrating on.
Yeah, and most of mine have been helping to use the tools that even we have been using. So Stellarium and World Wide Telescope, all of that. So introducing them to those resources, as well as the NASA resources. One of the PD sessions that I did was a Solar System Ambassador program, and so introducing them to the to what is available for them, because right now teachers are trying to transition from classroom learning to online, and they don't have time to find the resources. So being able to walk them through where these things are, things that they can give to their students, as well as offering support with programs or whatever. That's basically what my PD sessions have been like.
Patricia, go ahead.
Okay, well, just a couple of points. I think the point is there's a whole range of things we can do for teachers, and it goes from, you know, a full 3-hour graduate level course, which is 45 contact hours, you know, 3 hours a week for 15 weeks, all the way to a 1-hour training on Stellarium or eclipses, or which we also do. And I think it might be cool to put together a web page where we can all post all of the things that we do. So we can, you know, I can send some teachers to you, and you can send some teachers to me, or some of these are public, you know, so it's something, it's a way we can actually, you know, help maintain the community and help support each other. Because as I mentioned in the chat window, when we do this, our real-time planetarium shows with by Zoom, and we explain to them, you know, this is 180 degrees wide, so you're gonna have to kind of think about it wrapping around you. They kind of get it, and they say, you know, I can't wait to see this in the dome. And so I think keeping our science in front of them, keeping our technology in front of the people is going to make reopening so much easier. And I don't think they really harm each other. And getting to the teachers, you'll get to the students.
Yeah, Michelle made that point in the chat. Having provided professional development for teachers in the past, they're more likely to support the planetarium because, hey, we happen to be a resource that actively is giving them something useful. And we know that K through 12 education is not going away. College education is not going away. So clearly, if we're doing something to help those foundational aspects of society, that probably puts us in better shape. Chris McCall mentions that animal shelters are doing a lot of stuff online now and are still getting adoptions. I know that Mary Holt can speak to that. I think went through the entire adoption process for her guinea pigs online, and then now has 2 nice new guinea pigs. And so clearly it worked for her. It's working for the animal shelters. Patty Seaton, go ahead.
Sorry, I had to figure out how to unmute myself because I have too many windows open. To go back what you were talking about, this is the kind of collaboration that you mentioned, Patricia. This is exactly what Amy Gallagher and Michelle Wissison and I have started doing, because we realized that we were all 3 of us developing online curriculum for teachers for primary. So we're now working together to do that. And we're doing things like you said. It's like I actually just finished a lesson plan for first grade where I created a Google presentation for the teachers with the links to the worksheets, with the links to the videos, with the links to supporting documents. So those are the kinds of things we're working on. And I just put into these notes here, hey, let's use the DOM Dialogues Google folder for sharing all of our resources. Plus we're presenting at online LIP. So that's just a plug for our talk.
Well, of course, the Dome Dialogues is amongst ourselves. We need a public facing page that people can, and with a calendar.
Well, there's the domedialogue.org, which is available to everyone. So,
well, it's certainly something where that I think is a little bit more into the realm of leveraging the kind of, this is the important thing. It's leveraging the financial sides of the regional organizations and of IPS. You know, I think Dome Dialogues has always sort of been backwards facing. It's looking at us and trying to be more professional development for us. And this would be a great opportunity if yet again we're saying, you know, well, why do we need regional conferences? Why do we need an international society in this time? Well, this is one of the big reasons how, you know, SEPA people can be focusing on SEPA states, and MAPS can be working on MAPS, and we're going to run into the same things in France and Germany and in Asia, where we do have the regionalization of this sort of professional development. It may be more prevalent, I think, here in North America, but it's certainly an opportunity where, you know, let's leverage the power of the organizations we have to do something like that. And that gives us even more of an opportunity to reach out. So Patty, Patricia, I think we're gonna have a little bit more to talk about that. I think it's a fantastic idea. Yes, so everybody wants to share lessons. So yeah, share and share amongst yourselves as much as possible. Any here? Yeah, and so I think with what Chris McCall has said, if you have anything lesson-wise that you'd like to place on the Google Drive, please do populate that as much as possible. It gives us a foundation to work from, and then, you know, let's leverage that into something a bit more outward-facing as we move forward. I think it'll be a great project for this year. Any other topics that we'd like to discuss? Because we are now in sort of the openest of open forums. Please go crazy. Anything else that might be on your minds when it comes to reopening?
What tricks are you guys going to use or gals and guys are going to use to convince your admin or your higher ups that reopening is a good idea at some point when it's safe to do it?
It's a good question. Who makes the decision about whether your dome opens or not? Is it you or is it your administration?
Being part of the university, I was going to say, I know in our case, it will be the university that makes that ruling in terms of when we can reopen. They've talked about potentially August 1st for public-facing portions of the university. But one of the big things is going to be, you know, a checklist that we can go through and that assures that both staff, public, you know, is going to be safe for coming into any of these facilities, and that we're you know, following both the state guidelines, but also then the university ones. So that will sort of be key. That's actually a question I had as well. Have anyone been developing sort of checklists or have checklists from their, you know, from their larger institutions about what the requirements are to reopen? Because having some of those to be able to share, I think, will be very helpful.
Naomi, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
It's an unrelated question, so I'm happy to wait if people have responses.
Okay, not a problem. Paulette, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, so we are actually working with the NSF, not the National Science Foundation, the National Sanitation Foundation. And we are working with them to develop our guidelines and procedures. So they're actually coming in and doing, and so we're doing this throughout our cultural campus. So the Detroit Institute of Arts, the Detroit Historical Society, the Michigan Science Center, Charles H. Wright. We're all working together with the National Sanitation Foundation to put together a code of practices. They'll also then help train us, and they'll even secret shop us throughout to make sure that we are continuing the practices that we have decided to move forward with. So getting together with an institute or a organization like that is very, very helpful. And I know they are really excited and gung-ho to help us with this. And once we get some of that stuff, I think we'll probably have a walkthrough with them in a couple of weeks. I can share those best practices that we have gotten from them, and always willing to share information, especially when it keeps people safe.
Now, of course, taking the temperature of the room does seem that this group, and probably planetariums in general, a bit more conservative on opening dates than just about anybody else. Wanting to push those days as far into the future as we feasibly can. My colleague Chris Seal had sent me a message. He's unable to make it today, but said, one of the industries that we can look to kind of moving forward for some guidance is going to be movie theaters, and sort of what they do. They've got billions and billions of dollars at stake, and you could combine all the planetariums in the world and we couldn't get to, maybe we could get to $1 billion, I don't know, but it's a much larger industry, of course. And so seeing what their best practices are, they're going to open much sooner than I think most of our facilities will. Be a good idea to kind of keep an eye on that as well, and see what we can reappropriate from their side to what we can do here at the planetarium. Kat says there'll be a legal notice at the door. Kat's at the Ingram Planetarium in Sunset Beach, North Carolina. A legal notice at the door, though, that we cannot truly guarantee they won't get the virus, which becomes a question in and of itself of what happens if you reopen and people start getting sick at your facilities. Is that a concern enough to go to administration and say waiting is a better option, other than, oh, okay, so someone's planetarium is now a hot spot? Does that effectively doom that facility? And does that kind of play into your thought processes?
Yeah, our university's already talking about that with legal, and that actually will be one of the determinations in terms of when the university reopens to the public, is having something either from the state that says that, if we do and we follow this particular checklist, that we've done our part, and that there's not, liability, and the liability actually goes both ways, not just for the public, but for staff, because the university is very conscious of trying to make sure that staff are safe as well. So I think a lot of facilities are probably going to have to ask that question. And I know that is one that the whole committee at the university looking at reopening, and that's one of the big things they're doing, is talking with university legal about how to do this in a way that minimizes risk. So that's going to be important as well.
Yeah. So not only are we presenters and scientists and communicators, we're now like armchair legal analysts too. So the fun of being in the planetarium world at this point. Patricia talking about tickets needing to have a waiver. Chris McCall, of course, bringing up the point that some universities have already said they will not be holding in-person classes in the fall semester. I know the University of California system has already made that determination. So, that's going to be, that may play a big role in that. And then, of course, the biggest concern is whether or not we're looking at we're going to be looking at a second phase of infections moving forward, whether or not that is a sort of a hill or it's a massive mountain, and then how that's going to affect all of the work that we're doing now. Kind of looking through here, contact tracing. Have any of you given thought to, upon reopening, trying to get information from whatever information you're able to from visitors for things like contact tracing, in case there are outbreaks or infections that occur in your areas.
If they're using a credit card, you already have their name and potentially their zip code as well. So just a thought to the not accepting cash for most of us, you will have their name and zip code.
Naomi, go ahead.
I'm also wondering if people at their institutions are having discussions about live versus canned planetarium shows. I know overall as an institution, we want to move towards live shows, but with the coronavirus, we're starting to get pushback twofold on them. One being staffing and not quite knowing what our staffing model will look like. And as of now, our priority is summer camps. But also that concern of an extra level of contact. They're starting to ask what the value of live is and if it's enough to overcome a perceived safety barrier.
So a good question on is there going to be how important is the distinction between live and possibly interactive? We can do live, but interactive programming or sort of pre-rendered, pre-recorded content. And of course, that would go for us creating that pre-recorded content as well, and then sharing that, not just getting pre-rendered movies from content providers and the like. Marco, go ahead.
Okay, I think you today have inspired me to something that I may try to do. It's about what you said about the virtual field trips. When we go with our mobile planetarium to a school, we are inside their schedule. They had Spanish, social studies, science, so they don't go to that lesson, they come to our planetarium. I'm thinking we should produce something that can be introduced inside the normal daily current schedule of the institutions, so they can dedicate us maybe 40 minutes or so with their teachers and the whole classroom. So we just get invited into their schools right now. And so what is our role? We have to provide a better way of teaching astronomy or whatever you are into that is useful and attractive for the institution and for the teachers who are currently struggling a lot to produce the contents. So we can collaborate with that. Here, I think private schools will be our first potential clients for that, but I think we'll have to move a little quick to maybe produce some pre-recorded content, but also be able to interact with it, even if it is pre-recorded. Like we saw yesterday, I think with the OBS, with this green screen, Michael, remember? You put the stellarium behind you, and I think we should pull up our virtual studies setup and be ready to offer that kind of things. So I'm going to. Okay. And thank you for the inspiration from all of you.
Absolutely. Paige made the point of, even with a pre-recorded show with the push button planetariums, you still need to have somebody in the room, and whether that actually makes any difference in if you have somebody in the room pushing a button or you have somebody in the room giving a show, does that actually change the level of exposure that person is going to?
We still do a live introduction, go to the bathroom, turn off your cell phones so you're in front of the audience at that point. Then afterwards, 15-minute start talk. So maybe a little less exposure because you're not in front of the audience as much, but it still doesn't seem like a huge difference to me.
Agreed. And then Michelle with a wonderful call to action. We shouldn't be limited by a physical facility. We're educators, even though they call us planetarians. And so it's clear in the last just 2 months how much we've seen people go from, I've never used Zoom in my life and I have no idea how to stream things onto the internet, to, you know, places that are now giving like 3 or 4 shows a week online. And I'm still getting messages. I'll get messages every week from people like, hey, this is, you know, great ideas and we're really excited about it. And like, go look at this and tell me what you think. And it's like, that's so much more than we could have imagined. So it's true. Like we're a hardy, inventive bunch, very, very clever group of people. And it's nice to see that sort of expand exponentially here. In it feels like 8 years, but really it's only been like 7 weeks, which is the most ridiculous part of all. Mike Murray's says there's always a live section after the show. So no matter what's going on in the Dome, there's going to be somebody who's presenting. And then, of course, Richard McColeman brings up the very important point. Something can always go wrong. And if there's nobody in the room to fix it, then you're going to have some very, very disappointed audience members. Jeff Holt, go ahead.
All right, forgive me, but I've got a few points just kind of saved up after hearing all of these great comments and ideas. For my planetarium, I can't imagine, I'm in a school district planetarium, but we also serve the public. And I can't imagine my planetarium opening up until vaccines are widespread. And knowing that reality, I think I will be using some of the ideas that I've seen people doing already and talking about here today to do more virtual lessons. But in the fall, people have talked about if schools are even open, at least in Wisconsin, it would be very different than what we're seeing, you know, what we saw, you know, pre-COVID, where, you know, kids would be coming into the class at staggered times so that they're not in the hallway at the same time. They would be staying in their classroom the whole time, staggered recess times, not going on field trips, not even going to the lunchroom. They would have lunch in their classroom. And so I think even if schools are open, we'd be looking at a totally different situation. I wanted to mention a little bit more about that Ticket Leap website that I described. They do, it only costs like 25 cents plus like 1.5% for doing tickets online through them if your ticket prices are $5 or less. And so that is a pretty cheap way to do it. They make it really easy. Our visitors have really appreciated how smooth the system is. And if you did, you know, have to open and you did have to have a way to do contact tracing, we found that once people got used to that system, they preferred it. And so we have, well, had almost no cash sales anyway, because all of our shows were selling out online. And you have a way to actually send a message to all the people that are or were attending a specific event. And so that would be a way that if you did find out that somebody came to that show and was a carrier, that you get a message out to all those people. Can't imagine it would come to that, but that mechanism is there. And a request, sorry for all of these, but to try to tap into the hive mind that we have here. We talked a little bit about telescopes. We have a telescope loan program that, you know, luckily all of the telescopes were out in people's homes at the time we shut down. So hopefully they're still getting used. But at least by the end of the school year, I need to kind of call those back in. And I'm just kind of wondering if there was a way for me to get those back into circulation. Unfortunately, nice smooth surfaces like that are conducive to viruses, you know, thriving and surviving. So I can wipe things down but you can't wipe down the optical surfaces. And so you'd always have the surfaces of the lens, the eyepiece. Anybody have any ideas for how to deal with that? And I think I'm finally done. Thank you.
Yeah, for the sanitation on the eyepieces, there was some research done at a local university here about how the medical folks could reuse some of their PPEs. And one of the things they found was just leaving things in a warm oven, can sanitize them like 170 degrees for, a couple hours. So I don't know how ideal it would be to do that as well. But, from what I've heard and understand, the virus doesn't do good in high temperatures and low humidity. So if you can kind of put those things in isolation in that kind of environment for an extended period of time, that could be a good way to kind of sanitize it without actually doing anything abrasive.
Adam Fans, of course, brings up the point he would not bake an eyepiece. I think at worst, Brian's saying just send everything to Phoenix in the summer, and then it'll eventually get back to us. But one of the things that Brian brought up, Brian is in North Carolina. He's going to be co-hosting or was to be co-hosting CAPE this year. The Carolina Planetarium Educators get together. And his question, of course, was about what are we thinking the future of regional conferences and meetings are going to be? And that's a big question. I know IPS is looking at doing an online conference some point. Right now, it looks to be early August. There's the online LIPS that's going to occur in July. There's always the possibility that if things happen in Michigan, we're not able to have an in-person GLIPA. I think that's a great question. Sort of maybe kind of throw it out there. This would be a good data point for the regionals and IPS. But what do you all need from the regional meetings and from the conferences and things? And how do we replace some of it or all of it? Or, do we really strive to have the in-persons as much as we can? So just open that up for discussion.
It's going to be important to get back to face-to-face conferences at some point. Online is a fine temporary solution, but there's too many things that we get from having face-to-face meetings. The vendors being able to show us the latest, latest and greatest of their, both content and technologies, and just the social aspect of it. I mean, I think, like I say, I think online is fine for a temporary solution, but let's hope that at some point there is a vaccine in the future that we can safely return to, conferences and meetings and having that interaction, that sharing of ideas and, and camaraderie that's so important.
Yeah, Naomi brings up, I think the bigger issue may not necessarily be whether or not we can host conferences, but rather that people may not be able to attend them for travel funding for professional has been cut. And that would mean, if we're online for at least for the time being, probably the next few months, how vacation and flex time makes this much easier. Julieta, there's a lot of camaraderie with having everybody here and being able to see each other, which is great. It would be nice at some point to shake your hands and hug you guys, but soon, it's. I think did George Harrison say it best? All things must pass. So we're hopefully going to get we'll get through this and we'll be good. So we're going to get through this next part. Mark Webb, go ahead.
Yeah, I kind of foresee these e-conferencing elements being incorporated into live get-togethers. I think it allows people who would not be able to attend otherwise to participate. So it could actually increase attendance at conferences. but I have to agree with Sean and Julieta and others that it's no substitute, and that, you know, eventually when we can, we need to get back to physically meeting, because the amount of immersion that you get at a physical meeting is completely different than what you're ever going to be able to experience in this kind of format.
Yeah, absolutely. And so Paula makes the case, of course. GLIP has had a streaming aspect for their annual conferences for several years now. And I think if anything, all we're proving now is that this is a little bit easier than maybe most of us thought it was, or at least being able to interact online and do this sort of thing. And I think it only is going to make the in-person conferences better. But I think, and Sean can probably speak to this as a longtime officer of IPS, is that anything that allows us to reach more people and provide better services can only be good in the long term for the health of our organizations. All right, so we'd originally intended this to go to 1:30. It's now 1:45. We still have almost everybody in the room. We want to be cognizant of everyone's time, but of course, this is an important topic, and we'll keep it open for as many of you for as long as we can on this. Is there anything else that we'd like to share? Anything super important that's popped up over the hour and 40 minutes that we've been talking here this afternoon? And at least in the meantime, like, massive thanks to Patty, who is now on, I believe, the 8th page of single space notes on all this. So, we'll get it edited down and do that and get all of this out a little later. But one of the things we're hoping is that all of this is going to be not only can you access all of it, but at least for some of the discussion notes and for certain documents, not full edit power for people, but the ability to go in and comment and have those comments in there, so that this becomes a little bit more of a living, dynamic document that we can continue to add to over and over and over again. Mike Francis brings up a great idea. For those of you who are mobile only, or you do predominantly mobile planetarium work, I know we'd be happy, whether through the Dome Dialogue Zoom or through Dome Dialogue itself, to facilitate anything that you guys might need, to have sort of a smaller meeting and some breakouts for that. And then the other thing I really want to stress is, and Chris, I'll get to you in just a second, all of the resources that we're trying to put together for Dome Dialogues are available to anyone. So while this is the Dome Dialogue Zoom, if you do not have a Zoom account that goes past 40 minutes, let us know and we'll set you up with a host position for a day and let you have access to that. Just contact me. If it helps you, that's what the resources are for. And so we want to make sure that that's available to as many people as possible. So let's jump to the other side of Pennsylvania. Krista, go ahead.
This might be circling back quite a bit, and I don't necessarily expect answers right now, but we're looking at options for like when we're sanitizing things and cleaning things, and especially since we're going to have audiences coming in and hopefully cycling through with multiple shows a day at some point. If anyone has any ideas for, like, I don't know, sustainable ways to keep everything sanitized, because I don't know how realistic, like, going through a pack of Lysol wipes every day will be, especially since everyone else in the world is also going to be trying to do that. So if anyone has any ideas for that kind of thing, especially like our seats, I don't know what we're going to do with our seats because we have fabric seats. So we can't really wipe them down. We can wipe down the headrests and we can wipe down the armrests, but we are kind of limited in that way. But also mainly figuring out a long-term solution for that if we're going to be cleaning, hopefully, multiple times a day. So if anyone has any ideas, I'd be totally happy to hear about it.
Toshi, go ahead.
I gotta undo everything. So I don't have any answers, but I did have something just to add to sort of the broader question that Carissa brought up, because I've been kind of thinking about this too, just sort of the general cleaning. And, one question I have is, who is doing this cleaning? Is it, all of us individually? Is it going to have to be, someone that, the custodial staff at our institutions? I know sort of, where I'm at a community college, there are sort of like union rules where, in theory, right, on paper, only the custodial staff is supposed to be doing this cleaning. But someone brought up in I forget if it was on Dome Dialogues or someone else about, having custodial perhaps, clean your theater top to bottom, possibly touching and interfering with optical surfaces and things like that. Perhaps not the best idea. But also just, how long does that take between shows? I mean, I know we all love to get back to our regular schedule of doing, 5, 6, 10 shows a day, whatever it is we've been doing. But, what is that time between? I think may have been Adam earlier at the very beginning talking about, that it'll probably take at least an hour in between shows to sanitize. And so, so along with that, what is good enough? What, how much sanitizing should we be doing? Again, I have no answers, but just to add on to what Carissa brought up just now.
We've got some talk in the chat. Jim just says a giant can of Lysol, but that's Texas. They just shoot the Lysol and the can blows up and it just covers everything and disinfects it. They don't actually do that. But you might believe it because it was Texas. Marco says he uses a mixture of alcohols without water to clean the cloth chairs, disinfects and evaporates fast, no odor or residues, but could be expensive. Noreen, of course, bleach can discolor fabric, so keep that in mind. And then, of course, there is the great problem now that you may have had a staff of 4 or 5 before, and now that staff may only be 1, and now it's you doing the show and resetting and cleaning. Liz Klimek from South Carolina State Museum, staff of 1 now, so it's all going to fall on her shoulders. And then there, of course, there is the risk, as Jeff Holt brings up, of the staff sanitizing every time there's a show is going to put more and more emphasis on trying to keep the staff safe when you're now, kind of face in each of the chairs trying to clean them, day in and day out. Jim Bader, there are many holes in the boat. We did not have as many lifeboats as we thought we needed. So we're all trying to get south and into the warmer waters right now. So we'll figure that out. Mike Francis says Flex Seal. One of the ways to just slap it right on there and everything will be better. Susan Button with a great idea. For those of you who may have access to individuals in the medical field, who we can glean some insight, sort of what hospitals and other sort of very, very high risk areas, what they're doing and what sort of best practices we might be able to glean from that as well. Of course, not to that level, I would think in most cases, but certainly see what's useful there. Anyone else with any topics? Oh, Drew Gilmore brings up hand sanitizer, where to get that. A number of distilleries around the country have moved some of their production into creating non-gel sanitizer. I've got a little bit here. This is hand sanitizer from the Atwater Beer Company in Detroit. Works really well. I can tell I had one open wound and it hurt real bad, which means it's working. It's how you know. I see some hands up. Mike Francis, go ahead.
As to Susan's statement question, I just read an article in the New York Times about cleaning the stock exchange, which is about like cleaning a museum. And they figure it will cost them $100,000 once a month to do the major cleaning. And then they will have to do cleaning every single day at least 3 or 4 times, and that's not included in the $100,000. So cleaning is going to be a gigantic problem.
Right. Anyone else? Julieta brings up the one of the dirty places we haven't talked about, of course, are people's cell phones that they're bringing in are probably not getting sanitized. So thoughts about that. I think, Julieta, you're joking about hazmat suits, but I think we're at this point, it almost seems like if everybody had their own, we'd be in a little bit better shape. So at this point, it's like there's no idea too far-fetched to try to get our facilities back online. So anything else? We're pushing right up against 2 o'clock, so do want to be cognizant of everybody's time. But if there isn't anything else to go over, we've kind of extinguished our brain powers for this afternoon. Then I'd like to thank all of you for coming out and participating in the reopening roundtable. I think we got a lot of great information. Huge round of applause to Patty for just plugging away this entire time, getting us all this information. And so you're going to see the links and the notes and the chat transcript. We're going to be putting that on Dome Dialogues. You'll see that on Dome L. We're going to be putting it on the Planetarian Network. And then feel free to share that with as many people as you can, just so that we're adding to this information continuously. One of the ideas we had in the chat was, probably in a few weeks, probably in the 4 to 6 week range, probably reconvene for another one of these e-conference sessions where we're able to kind of see what's the experience as you've opened. Now we're kind of on the precipice of it, when some people really take that step over into being open and public facilities again, how those things are moving. So please continue the conversation. Feel free to share. I think we're doing a really great job as a community here to come together, and it's been really, really heartening. And we'll continue to play the conferences by ear. We don't want to do this forever and ever and ever. I think Sean kind of hit that nail on the head. We'd like to get back in person at some point, but we'll do everything we can to keep the professional development going and provide avenues for these kind of conversations. So until next time, thank you everybody for attending today. You're now all unmuted, so have yourself a wonderful rest of the day. We'll see you next week.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Patty.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael, for
Bye.
hosting.
Thanks, everybody.
Yes.
All right.